Hello, everyone. It's Dan King here with another Fireside chat where we speak with leaders that are working at the intersection of humanity and business strategy. And I am very excited today to be joined by Gadi Pollack, leadership coach and Vistage chair. Gadi, welcome to the show. Pleasure to be chatting with you today.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, Gadi, let's just start out with the wonderful work you do in the world and the story that brought you to this point.
Sure. So I am a leadership coach. I'm also a Vistage chair and have been for the past 15 years. And during that time, I've spent about 8,000 hours coaching leaders. And it's interesting and fascinating to me, Dan, that you talk about the intersection between humanity and business strategy, because that is exactly how I got to be a chair. And about 15 years ago, I had this calling that I need to stop what I was doing, which is I had a successful insurance practice. And I had this call that I needed to do something else and did not know what it was. So I took a year off and followed my feet. And I facilitated business meetings. And I love talking to people one-on-one. And I did that, and two people came up to me and said, "You have the personality of a Vistage chair, that is your nature, that they will pay you to do what you are doing for free." And so I spoke to Vistage, and I turned them down twice. And the universe has its way of sending messengers. And so a third person sat me down and say, "Look, you are a Vistage chair in your nature and personality. I was part of a group where a member died, and the other members helped his wife run the company till it could be sold." And I said, "That's what I want. Will you help me build a group?" And he did. And here we are 15 years later. At the time I started the group, I had this intuition or this mindfulness or this awareness that was related to a battalion commander I had served with in the Israeli army in the 73 war. And his name was Amnon Eshkol, and he retired as a general. I looked him up, reconnected with him, and we started a series of conversations. And he was the most inspiring and most humane leader I've ever met. He charted the course of my life, and it starts with a battle on October 14th, 1973, the largest tank battle since Kursk in World War II, 750 Egyptian tanks against 750 Israeli tanks. We're about to be outflanked by 30 Egyptian tanks, and Amnon calls for help and reinforcements 3 times, receives no answer, and he then takes a platoon of 4 tanks and destroys the enemy force, rescues everybody. And he was the lone survivor of that battle in terms of being unhit, and everybody else was either killed or injured. And so that story stayed with me and called me back to leadership, the example of what humanity and leadership and skill and courage and fortitude could do. And I reconnected with him. Make a long story short, I would go to Israel every year, visit my parents, siblings. I'd spend 1 or 2 times a year talking with him for hours and hours and recalling events. And his wife got involved, and it just opened a lot up for us. Eventually, he reminded me of events that I had no memory of, that he told me I was there, which eventually led me to being diagnosed with combat-related PTSD that I had lived with for my entire life, and led me into a very deep dive the past 7 years into understanding the human nervous system, trauma, how it affects leaders. And what I discovered 2 basic things. One is that how oftentimes the business issues that I'm dealing with in these confidential discussions, these open heart-to-heart I love being the confidant and hearing them and where they open up their fears, their insecurities, what's holding them back. And oftentimes it's fears and their own insecurities. And my skill is in reading that, helping them identify, name it, and move beyond that so they can grow themselves and their companies. The second thing that came out of these series of conversations with Amnon was that he kept telling me that I was empathic and that I should lead that way. And that was something that I had fought. I had considered empathy or mindfulness or awareness or sensitivity as weakness. And here was the first person in my life who was actually somebody I highly respected, somebody who you couldn't doubt his courage or his manhood, who really set me on that course of self-acceptance of myself and my skills, and using, if you will, the intuition and the feelings, the physical sensations I had in my body. And my fear was that as I started doing that, I would get called out as a fraud, as the imposter syndrome. And CEOs would say, "Show me the data. How do you know that?" In the thousands of hours I've spent coaching them, not one of them has ever said that. They've always said, "How do you know that? How do you know what's happening inside me?" And so that journey of acceptance of myself, and eventually I identified that if you talk to leaders and ask them, what has made you successful? They can tell you one or two skills that they have. They're either visionary or they're persistent, or they're really good at connecting, or they're innovative, or they can adapt, or they're creative. They can tell you lots of different things. In working with them, I've identified that, as it was for me, that I was always strategic. I always loved history and the big picture. I had courage to go to the military, but I had flexibility, that adaptability, the persistence to grow, and the empathy. And those five powers, when I activated all of them, was when I was at my best, when I had the most impactful results, when I was able to support leaders in transforming themselves. And as I was having these series of conversations with Amnon in Israel, and he was telling me about myself, and I was going through these phases of confusion. Why are you telling this? Why are you trying to make me? Are you flattering me? No, that can't be. What is going on? And I would notice the same pattern with the CEOs I was coaching, was that I would see that they had skills that distinguished them from others, and when I would comment on it, they would act surprised or not be aware of it. And eventually, what I discovered, a pattern over these 8,000 hours that Amnon had, I had, and the leaders that I coached had, which was that when they were whole, when they were complete, when they were fully humane, there were five core leadership powers unique to them, and the combination is unique to them, that really gave them the answers to what's the direction I should go in, what's the direction the company should go in. And being creative people and founders, as you described, that's a very big temptation. As a matter of fact, the CEO I was coaching yesterday called it, he was a younger person. He said, my generation calls it FOMO, fear of missing out. All these ideas and thoughts and great possibilities, and yet the limitation of times and resources. And what I supported him yesterday with, and what I support leaders, is identifying yourself, accepting yourself, implementing all those five core leadership powers. That grounds you into who you are. There's a physiological shift that happens, that people know it, that people are calmer, that their heart rate goes down, that they become settled, they become connected with their own inner wisdom, if you'll say, their own inner peace. They are settled and they know what to do.
So much richness to go into there. I could ask you a question about all of that, but maybe just a first couple of comments to start. We think about trauma, and in so many ways, it's the loss of agency. It's that moment where our nervous system is confronted with something that it can't process, something that feels sort of beyond it. And trauma healing has become, a bigger and bigger part of mainstream discourse. And increasingly, I think people are starting to understand that agency that was lost in that key moment, we reclaim it by being ourselves, by having the courage to see, ooh, this is me or this is not me, right? and taking those confident steps to reclaim that sense of agency it's the hero's journey, right? That Joseph Campbell spoke about. It's that opportunity to see who we are meant to become and start to, maybe slowly at first, but start to step into that. And I can't help but think that initial moment when you felt that calling, I mean, there were so many callings you felt at different moments in that story, but that time where, even just to become a Vistage chair, you were in insurance and something spoke to you. I'm curious for CEOs that are at the point of starting to understand what we're talking about. How did that calling show up for you? Was it in the body? Like what form did that calling take? Knowing that you needed to leave insurance, not knowing what it would be, but knowing that you needed to leave. What form did that calling take?
It was just, I felt totally blocked. I can't do this anymore. I have no interest in doing this. And actually, I learned a lot from my clients. And prior to that, I had done numerous things. I'd been in the jewelry business, I'd been in the wholesale business, I'd been in the retail business. And one way of looking at yourself is I never really hit the grand slam in either one. I was successful in all of them. Another way of looking at it that one of my client CEOs told me, he said, look, some of the best coaches in baseball were utility players because they got to see the field from every perspective. And that insight was that really the different things I had been doing was about because I was curious about business and what it looked like to be in a manufacturer, what it felt like to be in the wholesale business. And really that the journey was, as an empathic person, to have a felt sense, a visceral sense of what it feels like to be in every aspect of business. And today, the things that my members and clients tell me often and often that they appreciate most, the thing that I undervalued, the thing that I was trying to quell, the thing that I was actually embarrassed about was,
Yes.
You can always tell me what the other guy is thinking. And appreciating the gift of that and the acceptance and the years it took to do that. So to answer your question, Dan, listen to your body.
It can seem so woo-woo at first, right? It can seem, for those of us that come from some kind of conventional white-collar background, that in itself is an act of courage. Doing it, talking about it. Why is that exactly?
I think people feel, particularly CEOs, who are trying to fit in. So our need to fit in against the need to be ourselves, the constant stress between that. Playing the KPI game, talking the numbers, talking data is safe.
Yeah.
It makes you sound like people's idea of a CEO. And it's maybe your own false idea of a CEO, somebody you heard. But when you look and ask leaders who are the people who inspired you or who moved you or who helped you in difficult situations, had nothing to do with the numbers as it did for me. It was somebody who took an interest in me, who cared for me, who helped me see who I was, who believed in me more than myself.
We talk about trauma, we talk about how part of reclaiming agency is this deeper relationship with your body. It's paying attention to those signs. Those of us with big brains tend to intellectualize, right? And what a way to take us out of our body. What a way to, as you say, be in a place of safety, but reclaiming that sense of agency that we lost. It can't come from safety. It has to come from courage, the courage to enter the tank battle, the courage to save others that are suffering around you, right? And that's not an analytical thing. It's a felt thing.
Absolutely. And the sense of disassociation. So when we're stressed or we feel we have an overwhelming challenge, instinctively our body will go to our strength. And when we have intelligence, we will try to think or analyze the problem, which in a repetitive basis can become a form of disassociation. When there's too much pain in my body, I go into thinking, and therefore I feel no pain. And I convince myself that I'm smart and I know what I'm doing and all is well. The reality is the sense of agency and power never comes from our head or thoughts or ideas. They come from action, from our body. And it comes from the courage to reconnect with our bodies and needing the guide along the way. My attempt to solve my problems were an exercise in futility when I did it alone. It was when I hired a coach who, as it turned out, had overcome her own trauma that it turned my life around. And that's what I do for others. Identifying the trauma, identifying what's holding you back is trauma, is distress in your body, looking at the various coping methods, and then by example, leading by example.
Maybe one point, and then I have a bit of a challenging question for you if you're up for it.
Love challenges.
Awesome. So maybe the point, as we talk about trauma here, and it's not a subject I talk about too often here, but I am a trauma-informed coach myself, and I think it's just so important to start to raise society's awareness of the impact of trauma. When we talk about trauma, it isn't just about situations in which someone was in a war zone. It's in these situations that we commonly associate with trauma, these really high impact, extreme acute moments. It can also be the slow grinding disconnect between who you are and the work you do if those aren't a fit, right? Over time, especially if you're an ambitious person and you judge yourself by being good but not great, if you feel like you haven't achieved your potential and years go by in which who you're claiming to be in the world isn't who you really are, that in itself can be this slow grinding disconnect, right? So trauma isn't just the acute, it isn't just the obvious sort of crisis. It can also be this slower grinding disconnect that so many of us experience, right?
I do agree with that, Dan. And one of the biggest discoveries I had was what I call little t trauma or big T trauma. It doesn't have to be the things, as you're saying, that we associate: rape, violence, war. It can be somebody hit me, somebody with black hair hit me when I was 9 years old. And every time I see somebody like that, something happens. It's what you're talking about. It's a disassociation between who I am and what I'm doing, which is really the abandonment of myself.
Yes, exactly. And so here's the more challenging question, and challenging perhaps not just for you, but for me to articulate. And that's, it seems like when you noticed over the course of your journey, these moments where the disconnect was palpable, you really felt it, and you were brought these opportunities to reclaim your agency. So the offer, for example, to become a Vistage chair that came 3 times, right? Can you start to offer an opinion, at least, as to why it is when you take those courageous steps and you step up, why is it that the universe always seems to provide? Why is it that something happens a little bit differently in those moments?
Now, Dan, that's a powerful question, and that goes to spiritual issues and the spiritual beliefs about abundance and help and support. And fundamentally, is this a good world that can support people in their challenges and meeting their fulfillment and doing who they are? Or is it not? And that all depends on our early wiring in childhood, right? So if we grew up in a family where we are loved and nurtured and accepted, and our physical, emotional, and intellectual needs were met easily and rapidly, yes, that's our expectation, that there's always people there for me. They always show up exactly when I need it. And I think there's a Jewish Talmudic saying that those who start upon the path find support. Before I answered the call, the support may have been there, but I wasn't there. And I think they talk about it when the teacher is, when the student is ready to learn, the teacher shows up. That idea in various cultures, the primary prerequisite for all this is our own awareness and our own sense of the direction we need to go on. And then what I call homeostasis, like and I talk about, my way of talking about wholeness is I talk about a broken bone. Like if you break a bone in your arm and you go to the ER, who's really healing your arm? And it's really, the doctor may set the direction in which the bone wants to grow, but those two parts of the bone want to come together naturally. You don't have to think your way. You don't have to will your way. You don't need KPIs. All you need to do is set direction, take agency in your life about which way you want that wholeness to come together. Trusting that, I think, is the biggest challenge, because it's a non-intellectual, it's non-provable. And I think that then goes to talking to people about the most important things in your life, your relationships, the people you love and care for, or your physical needs. If I need to go to the bathroom, sex, hunger, the things that keep me alive. Do I get an email note with a spreadsheet and data saying now is the right time? Or do I feel it in my body and I just go?
Mm. It strikes me that that's so interesting when sort of juxtaposed with some writing of, you may know the Israeli writer Yuval Noah Harari, who writes about different gods, right? As humanity has evolved, it has felt the need for different gods, different things to believe in. And he would say that in today's age, the God that we bow down most naturally to is data, right? It's the God we kind of believe in. And so you're right. It's very difficult what you said there to prove, right? It's very difficult to create a double-blind study that can prove it. And with data being the God that we believe in, all the harder, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of brain power and intellectualizing backing the perspective that you need the double-blind study all the time.
Yes. And the way I address that issue is I talk about the three parts of the brain. That our brain that we tend to think about as thinking is really three parts. It's a neocortex, which is logical. It's the limbic system, which is emotion, and it's the brainstem, which is our basic bodily functions. And my own story of I went to therapy right after the war and I talked about it. But yet it didn't release the trauma from my body. It wasn't until I activated all three parts of it that I was able to release the trauma, regain my wholeness. So yes, it's really, I think, therefore I am. Our society's biased towards data, towards progress, toward technology, that all good things must come from thinking logic, that bad things come from giving in to temptation, from being emotional, right? Usually we say, oh, you're too emotional, therefore you didn't make a good decision. But yet we know that people make decisions based on emotion and then justify it with data. But the real decisions, if you think about the real decisions on your life that matter, who you marry, where you're going to live, your job, they're often emotional decisions.
And do you distinguish emotion from intuition? We can feel that a particular decision is interesting to us, or we can feel an emotional alignment with it. Is that the same thing as intuition for you, or is it distinct?
That is a great question, Dan, because that's a cause of great confusion because of the fact that we say, I feel, right?
Yes.
So I distinguish between emotions, anger, frustration, irritation, happiness, joy are emotions. They are distinct from physical sensations in my body. I got something in my neck. I got a butterfly in my fly. The confusion is caused by the say we feel, then we put the feeling against the logic, and the bias is, well, logic must win.
Yes, it makes total sense. So if a leader is interested in this philosophy, if they're starting to think, ooh, there's something in this, I feel some excitement, I feel something within me is drawn to this, what would be a first step for them to explore this territory? What should they do next?
Listen to themselves. Ask themselves if I feel excited. Journaling is a great way to do it on your own. To gain awareness, to translate logic, to integrate logic into feelings and emotions, physical sensations and emotions. You can start to journal about and increase your awareness. Oh, I was excited about this conversation or this person or this event or this experience. What about it excited me? And then start to look for patterns.
Yes. And I think part of, perhaps in my experience, the challenge in working with leaders on this level is everyone's sort of intuitional signature is a little different. I think the more we lose touch with it, the harder it is to remember, maybe even in childhood, what it would have felt like when you were in a place of perhaps greater purity, greater opportunity to feel intuitional sorts of sensations, but they're quite distinct. And you can really feel when a decision point comes up, you can feel a yes or a no in your body, right?
Yes, exactly. Learning to trust that, number one, is it's a cultural bias against it.
Yes.
And second, particularly when you're traumatized and we lose trust in our body.
Yes.
So overcoming that is a massive part of the journey.
Yes. And on trust, Do you feel leaders should always trust intuition, that feeling in the body? If they're really clear on it, is it a 100% yes, always trust it?
When I say trust, I mean trust to listen to it, to inquire what it is and what it's telling me, and start to create the patterns and
Hmm.
see and gain that trust, and then build the data to support it.
Build the data to support it. Okay. Okay. I like that. So it's not a question of listen to this and throw out all the data. It's no, 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 no. Data can be very powerful here, right? It's a language that we all speak. It's a language for convincing ourselves and others. Be guided a little bit more by the feelings in the body, but see if you can find data to speak to what you're hearing.
Exactly. And the journaling and the way I developed my system was seeing the patterns, having an intuition about something that applied to me, wondering, would this apply to somebody else? Like having the courage to ask
Yes.
the question, stay curious, ask the question, stay curious, keep asking, and start to look for patterns. Let your intuition be a guide into that.
If someone in listening to this feels a real excitement, I know I do, and would like to explore the possibility of working with you further, what would be a way for them to get started on that specific journey?
Sure. Check out my website, GadiPollack.com. Work with me page, and there's a questionnaire there, and you can fill out the questionnaire, have a deeper dive, and see if it makes sense to work together.
Yes, at the very top of the page, there's that work with me button that Gadi's mentioning. So click on that and you'll have a form and you'll have the chance to fill it out and explore the possibility. Gadi, such an impactful conversation. I will say I have felt a ton of excitement and chills in the body as I've listened to you today. So grateful for it. We love to always end on a human note. So we've talked a lot about the work you do, the genesis of that work, but when you're not doing that work, what do you do for fun?
Ah, and that has been part of my journey, because when I was traumatized,
Yeah.
I used to work all the time. There were no complicated questions. So I really enjoy walking in nature quite a bit. Um,
Mm.
I love talking to people, but being by myself as an introvert, I need time to recharge. Physical exercise, walking in nature, the ocean, beach, travel. I really enjoy. I've been to Hawaii and Ireland in the past 4 months, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Where in Ireland did you go?
A place called Clonakilty in the south of Ireland, near Cork.
Near Cork.
Took an
Okay.
Airbnb, and 5 minutes from the ocean. It was amazing.
Ireland is a magical place, right? It is this storytelling place. It is a place that is in touch with its history very deeply.
Yes.
Gadi, such a pleasure to be with you today. As I say, learned a ton and felt a ton, and that's just such a beautiful way to live. So grateful for this conversation.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your interest, your good and stimulating questions.